The inscription that once adorned the base of the statue of Chrysos, figure 5.9 in our textbook, reads this way, quote, "Stay and mourn at the tomb of the dead Chrysos, whom raging Ares destroyed one day as he fought in the foremost ranks." To view this piece of sculpture, you also would have seen the inscription, and you would have immediately understood that it tells us he is a hero. He died a hero's death on the battlefield. He accomplished great things as an individual, and in fact, as a warrior, it required Ares himself to kill this man. Ares, of course, is the Greek god of war. This then reflects on the achievements of the individual. The Greeks would place statues like this along the entranceways, and if you just go over here on one side of the road in, or over here, these would have been visible to everyone who passed and entered the city. So it was a way, again, of honoring the achievements of the individual, particularly those individuals who attained glory on the battlefield, as this young man did. And that comes out of our ideas drawn from Homer, whose heroes are Mycenaeans. So it continues the tradition of the idea of the achievement of the individual, especially in physical ways. Prowess on the battlefield, prowess in athletics, and perhaps prowess in the hunt as well. Very Greek in terms of honoring achievements of the person. We have another figure, 5.8 in our textbook. It's called the calf bearer, and this also has an inscription on the base that tells us the man's name, Rhombos, and he is bringing an offering to the goddess Athena. So we know exactly how this piece was used. It was not associated with a burial, but instead it was placed in a sacred precinct for the goddess Athena to forever visualize an offering that was being provided for her. This depicts a man a little bit broken, with a beard, that tells us this is a Greek convention to suggest that he is mature. He is not old, but he is an older person of experience and years beyond the young Chrysos who is depicted on our right. The reason I have these two figures together is I'd like you to see that the Greeks very quickly move towards naturalism. This is their goal. They are trying to create convincing works of art, and they are doing that by looking at real people, observing human beings for whom they had such high regard and respect. These two pieces were created 30 years apart approximately, and I'm hoping just by looking at them you can see the differences and you can see which one of these pieces was produced later. In other words, which one of these pieces is quote-unquote more advanced and has a greater degree of naturalism. I think you're going to decide that it is the figure on the right. It is Chrysos, and it shows a softer figure, a figure that has a little less pattern decorating it and moves more convincingly in our space. Okay, that's not to say that the calf bearer isn't a good work of art. It is. It is simply good for its own time. It shows, in fact, a pretty complex pose for the figure and therefore a complex composition. One of the things we see very early is that the Greeks begin to experiment with new poses. This too was based on the Ka statue, and I'd like to see in the fragment that there is still this left leg moving forward, so it would have been a figure standing with both feet on the ground. But now look at the way the Greeks have actually blended the human form with the sacrificial animal on his shoulders, and you can actually see an X that is running through this, linking the two figures together. This figure also has what we call the archaic smile that is shared with Chrysos and pretty much all of the figures in the 6th century BCE. It is clearly a figure that is a little, I'm going to say, more old-fashioned than the Chrysos. And the point I'm trying to make is how rapidly the Greeks move in the direction of increased naturalism in their works of art. Okay, the calf bearer then is important for that. It's important for a couple other things as well. One is it is one of the prototypes, not the only one, but one of the prototypes for a figure or design that we're going to see with a figure and an animal that is going to occur over and over again in art history and is still being used today. It is, in this case, an image of a human being bringing an animal to sacrifice. This will be picked up by the Romans, and when the Romans become Christian, they are going to use this ancient design and turn it into something very, very different in its meaning. It will become Jesus, and he won't be sacrificing an animal, but he will be carrying it protectively to take care of it. It will morph into the story of Jesus as Good Shepherd. So it's important to appreciate this as source material, one of the sources for that image that we're going to see later in early Christian art. Okay, in addition to that, this is also important because it is broken. It is one of the pieces of art that was displayed on the Acropolis, the sacred precinct overlooking the city of Athens on a fortified hillside. It was destroyed by the Persians. And it was destroyed along with the other monuments, the sculpture, as well as the architecture up there. When the Greeks went to rebuild after that destruction, they used these old pieces of sculpture as fill, as foundation material. And what that means is we actually got to save these. They were buried until they were excavated. And so, yes, I know it's damaged, but that damage documents a great war with the Persians, and it also helped to preserve this piece, which otherwise might have been totally lost. This is figure 511 in our textbook, and this is a chori. That means a female figure. And it also is important because it's one of the objects that was preserved because it was buried on the Acropolis after the destruction by the Persians. The deal here is some of the original color on the surface has survived. And the reason for that, not just that it was buried, but also the reason is the materials that were used. The method that was used by the painter. It is encaustic. Encaustic is a technique where pigment is mixed with hot wax and applied to the surface of a piece of sculpture, or perhaps a canvas for a painting. In this case, definitely sculpture. For those of you who, like myself, have spilled candle wax, you know how hard it is to get off things. And that's going to be true for the way in which encaustic paint applies and lingers on the surface of Greek sculpture, including a little bit here from the 6th century BCE in the Archaic. So what is our artist painting? Originally the eyes and the mouth as well as the hair. And you can see a little bit of the paint that lingers on the hair, but also the decorative surface trim on the garment of the woman. So there's a love of surface pattern in the Archaic, sometimes even verging on getting kind of fussy, lots and lots of it attracting our attention. I would like you to see that the figure again, I know it's broken, but it does still derive from the source of the Egyptian Ka statue. And in particular, if you go over here, there's the remains just at the tip of a left leg that would have been walking forward. The Greek artist had to come up with an adaptation, and the Greek artists were incredibly good at that. So what they did was actually have the woman's arm extend down as if she's lifting up the edge of her dress as she walks. So they begin with the Ka statue pose and very quickly experiment in a variety of ways. This figure also would have had its arm, its right arm, extending into space, so that again would be another variation from the original formula of the Ka statue. There is enough paint left on the surface so that we can estimate, and I'm maybe say guesstimate, what this would originally have looked like. It would have been very richly colored. It would have been placed in the open air, so it would have been highly visible. In the lower left of my slide, you get an idea of what in fact this might originally have looked like. This is a reconstruction based on fragments on the surface of this object. One of the things you might be thinking or have already noticed is this is a female figure, and it is not shown in the nude. In the ancient Greek world, it was totally acceptable to depict male figures in the nude, but it was considered inappropriate, at least in the 6th century and in the 5th centuries, to show female figures without their clothing on. Kind of, in some ways, a flip of what we expect in our own society today. This is another figure that is also a Kore, and I'm showing you this because it again will help us to see how very quickly the artists move in the direction of naturalism. This is created approximately 20 years before the piece that we just looked at. And I think if you look at our figure, you can see that the image, and this is 510 in our textbook, the image looks almost tree-like, like a pillar. It doesn't have a softness to the body, and it doesn't suggest the potential for movement. One of the reasons we like to look at this statue, though, is that it does have a lot of paint left and caustic left on the surface, on the hair, and also on the eyes of our figure. Again, we have a reconstruction located over on our right, fully painted, giving you an idea of what this might have looked like outside in the landscape on the sacred hillside of the Acropolis, overlooking the city below, as this statue would stand in for a person making an offering to a goddess. In this case, I'd also like you to look at the head of this, because some of these statues also, in addition to be vividly painted with a rich surface coloring, had a metal plates on top of their head, making them look, at least to our eyes today, most unusual. And you might be wondering, why are they doing that? And that is a good question. We know that they were protecting the statues. We think that they were actually protecting the statues from birdies that might have landed on top of the statues, and in the process of doing that, might have sullied, made dirty with birdie droppings on top of the statue. So this was a way to maintain the appearance of the statue, but simultaneously, it truly changes the appearance, the overall appearance of the way the statue looked.